I've been so caught up in these stories that I wanted to make sure to be ready.
This is The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. This is a special 50th episode of the podcast. To celebrate, we have one of our favorites, Mavis Gallant, and not one, but 4 stories. There is a series of 4 Mavis Gallant stories that might be presented to us in various sequences and that feature the stories of 3 characters, Edouard, Juliette, and Lena. I hope that's clear. 4 stories, 3 characters. Edouard narrates throughout. It starts with the Recollection, a rather vague title for a story that establishes a lot that's going on during a contentious time in occupied France. Edouard tells of his marriage of convenience with Magdalena. Whose convenience is it? She is over 10 years older than he is. She's originally from Hungary and a Jewish convert to Catholicism. She avoids deportation thanks to her marriage to Edouard. But while he finds her cosmopolitan and curious in her choice to be ignorant about politics, they part ways. Another woman in his life appears in The Colonel's Daughter and in Rue de Lille, Juliette. He's been on some adventures, and she, still a tender-aged teen, visits him in the hospital. She is a lonely girl, an only child whose father has been lost in the war and whose mother remains distant and aloof. In Edouard, she finds a cause. In her, he finds someone to take care of, a woman child. But it's clear his attempts to blunt the sharp edges of her loneliness fall short. And as she grows older, it is as if he has stayed just exactly who he has always been, and through it all, she's the polar opposite of Magdalena, her expensive, sophisticated attire and her Chanel perfume. Juliette would like to have children. There's even a name for an imagined child. But Magdalena will not give Edouard the divorce that would allow him to marry Juliette and have a child. But that's not quite the point, as you'll hear in our conversation. Everyone gets older in this series of stories. Things outside the characters change. Technologies take hold, conventions change, wars begin, other wars begin, disasters change the landscape. But the tiny stories we carry around with us that come from exactly who we are at our core are immutable, for better or for worse. Here now, Peter Orner and I discuss 4 stories by Mavis Gallant that one should read in any order at all. Recollection, The Colonel's Daughter, The Rue de Lille, and Lena.
The other day, I stumbled across one of these, and then it was in the collection, Overhead in a Balloon. And in the description of the collection, it had said that there were these, something called the Magdalena stories. And I didn't know what they were, and I sort of went searching for them, and then I came up with the first one, which is, and they're kind of, you never know they were related the way they're laid out in the original collection. And it just starts out with a recollection.
You said something very important, which is the way the stories are grouped in that book is different from the way they're grouped in the collected stories.
And only freaks like us would give a damn about that, but it's fascinating to me that she realized later, I suppose, that they needed to be, or that one way of that she could have identified them together, but I sort of love the fact that I just stumbled on them. Normally with Gallant, and she says this kind of famously, or at least famously to us, in her preface to their collected, there's something I keep wanting to say about reading short stories. I am doing it now because I may never have another occasion. Stories are not chapters of novels. They should not be read one after another as if they were meant to follow along. Read one, shut the book, read something else, come back later, stories can wait. And I think that these 4 stories grouped in a row, that, I love Gallant, I love what she says right there, because I always remember that, like, shut the book, read a story and shut the book. But in this case, that doesn't work. These stories are so and she has others like this. She has story cycles, and they're identified in the collected. But I don't know. This is completely just nerdy. But I'm just fascinated by the fact that when she originally publishes them, she sort of, it was, for those people who discovered it, that must have been an incredible thing. For those who didn't, or at least didn't quite realize that they were related until they were reading along, that also must have been an amazing experience. And it was for me just to go into from a story called Recollection to, in the original, to the and at least I'm gonna butcher every French pronunciation in this. Can I just say one thing off the bat? Not once for a minute did I worry about the fact that these were French people speaking English. And that these stories were completely in English. And yes, they're set in Paris and London, and on a train. But for the most part, they are utterly seamless. That they would be, and that I just didn't give a damn that they were speaking English in this, Anyway, so I guess what I'm trying to say is when I started the second story, which is late in this collection, it's called Rue de Lille, the street. I was just totally flabbergasted about how the movement of time, about just the relationship between the stories that I just totally wasn't expecting.
So, what I've enjoyed about this series is reading them in, talk about nerdy, reading them in completely different order every single time.
Huh.
But just to read, for instance, just to go in and read The Colonel's Child first, or Rue de Lille first. And granted, I am carrying, for sure, and they're not just the remnants of all of the other stories with me, walking into reading a story out of order. But it's just fun to see how Gallant made these sort of standalone stories very effective, very powerful, still emotional in the way that we can say Gallant's stories are emotional, which is different. I don't even know if emotional is the right word with Gallant. I mean, they make me emotional, but I'm not sure that's the word.
It's only by purely just because of the way these characters are created. But she's not writing with emotion. We somehow bring it somehow. I don't know how. You know what I mean? Like, she is not asking for an emotional response. She's doing something else. I don't know what exactly.
That is so well said. Like, yes, you just brought the idea to the front of my brain, and with actual words, I can figure it out. No, I was thinking about, like, I had to go have, like, massage therapy because my back is so jacked up from being crouched over the laptop for 18 hours a day. And I finally gave in. I don't like the idea of massages or anything like it, but I did it. And this woman, I'm not a person who gets massages, so I just thought she was going to rub my shoulders and I was going to be, like, blissfully asleep for a little while. But she just was pounding on me. It hurt. And, but how do I say this? It was like, this sounds so weird. I'm sorry I'm saying this now. So the idea of emotion with Gallant is something else. So the idea of what happened to me in this interaction with this stranger who was touching my back, oh my God, forget it. I'm done. I'm not going to go.
I think I know where you're going with this, and I think you should leave it in. Are you saying like somehow like pleasurable pain or something, or what?
So I was like, this is terrible. I'm never coming back. When she left the room and I got off the table and I got ready to go back out into the light, I thought, hey, I think I'm going to come back. First I was like, oh no, this is awful. What is this? This is wrong. And then afterwards I thought, oh yeah. I get it. I understand why people do this. I'll be back. Put me down for next month.
First of all, I wanted to say this is our 50th podcast. This is our 50th show. And in our way, we have like refused to make it timely. our 50th show, we could have done like, oh, our favorite story, whatever, whatever. No, I mean, this is a special show because we're doing 4 in a row, which we've never done before. But like, there's nothing especially relevant about these stories to the present moment, except for everything, you
Yes,
know?
except for
And,
everything. Yes.
and that's why I think your anecdote, I don't know, it makes some sense. Like, that maybe you tried to like get away from the world and you couldn't, and then you found that the pain, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I somehow these stories are, I mean, they're so enjoyable to read. They're beyond, I mean, they're, they're so fucking good that that we should just end the program now and have people just go read them because,
Yes.
you know, like, and we think of Gallant stories, the famous ones we've done. We've done Ice Wagon going down the street, which is probably maybe one of her most well known. And there's others that get, a little more attention. I've never heard of these like being talked about, but that doesn't mean anything. And that's anyway. What are these about, and why are they somehow relevant
Yes.
to the present moment? I think we'll get to.
But I do want to say it's what I think I think I texted it to you. I was thinking about it so much. It's like the expectations that you have as a reader walking into a story with this guy and a woman who seems, very beautiful, and then this other young girl that that he's in this particular context with, and your expectations about what could conceivably happen. It's this idea that you're walking into the story and the way she sets it up, and you just have these expectations as a reader of short fiction, not necessarily of Gallant, that it's going to go a certain way. And no, it just veers in a different direction, and you get on that wave and you go, and it does something even more extraordinary than whatever your expectation was. Does that make any sense? And you're
Yes.
okay.
And sorry, can I go ahead?
I was just going to say, and the effect is all the more, fantastic because you didn't expect that. You didn't expect to be laid flat on the floor,
Right.
thinking about your own life or this
Right.
crazy world or whatever love means or whatever history means or whatever death is about. Like the big, ginormous, gigantic things are somehow you're thinking about them. Like, what does Gallant do with the idea of history in these stories? Because she does a lot with the idea of history and places and the war and so many things related to these very things that I'm talking about. In these stories, I find she's doing something kind of different with the idea of history and Europe and the war, and she's doing something very different.
I'm bursting at because I think you're totally on it, and anybody who's read Mavis Gallant expects to be blown away by the subtle surprise that she will always turn a story into something you didn't expect. In these stories, though, we are in arguably a more familiar context. This is France, occupied France, and individual characters are called upon to act, either cowardly or heroically. And in this case, I mean, people listen to this, are going to think we're completely nuts at this point. Because we haven't even talked a single thing about the story, but we're like completely. But I think what you said about history, and so she even does it with something that I thought was almost kind of a sacred idea, and takes it into a like. Okay, so you've got a guy. It starts out the first story, which is just very quietly called a recollection. Like, you never know where you were heading. And I remember I opened a recollection thinking, all right, this is a 7-page story. I've got some time. I'm going to read a Mavis Gallant story. This seems maybe it's going to be a minor one. Of course, there isn't such a thing, right? Anyway, a guy in World War II occupied France, marries a Jewish woman in order to give her his last name so that she's protected. Beautiful thing. Beautiful idea, you know? Kind of like Schindler's Listy. You know what I mean? Like he does something heroic to protect this woman. But in Gallant's hands, she's totally incapable of creating a character like Oscar Schindler, for example, like somebody who's all one thing. And likewise, Magdalena, the Jewish woman he marries, is likewise completely, utterly singular. So she cannot possibly, in a gazillion years, represent anyone other than herself, as it should be, right? But if you take a lot of stories of this time, and especially when people are completely dehumanized, they become, for better or for worse, and usually just because there's no other way around it, they become, a mass in some ways. I think of even the great Primo Levi, who individualized all of his characters as best he could. There was still, in the context of the concentration camp, a mass of humanity. I don't know where I'm going. I'm completely off my head at this point. I'm just trying to say that, like, you have two incredibly singular characters. Magdalena is wonderfully shallow and completely ridiculous, and also, a converted Catholic and completely a kind of a religious zealot, it turns out later, or something. And she ends up being not that sympathetic a character, and he ends up not being that sympathetic a character. So then why am I completely in love with these people?
I mean, we do learn that she's somebody who loves ritual, and there's something with Catholicism there. And so it seems like a very artificial affinity for Catholicism. But also, something you said, look at what this guy does. He marries her to save her.
Yes.
In a historically speaking,
first line of the story.
Yeah, they make Oscar-winning movies about stuff like this, like
Absolutely.
This kind of story of self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
But then as you were saying this, my eye goes to the paragraph that begins, "I was 22, still a student. My parents, both teachers in the lower grades, had made great sacrifices so that I could sit reading books into early manhood." So, and of course, later in another story, he mentions that the parents are teachers. But the other thing about this is the word sacrifice there. Just as you were talking about what he did for her, the word sacrifice just jumped out at me. And I'm thinking about how he can put what a lot of parents do. It's a sort of, maybe it's a more common story, what a lot of parents do for their children, sort of as a bigger sacrifice in the grand scheme of his life. Like, he married this woman and saved her life, really. But the bigger sacrifice he's talking about is what his parents did for him. And was it worth it? Did it equal, like, a tremendous success for him? Well, we'll see. But it's just interesting what you're saying. It's this thing about history for me, which, and again, for me, the idea of history in these stories compared to other Gallant stories, it's just a different animal. It's like, it's the past, it's the present, it's nothing lasts, but it's very much like these personal events. And you think about this idea in 2026 about how, God, I can't even put this into words, but about how things that we experienced in our lifetimes that will be part of history, how individual people walking around right now represent those things. I can't put this into words. I'm just not smart enough to say it, but I feel like that a lot of that is going on here with these stories. The idea of his own personal story, carrying that forward, not being able to have a child to carry it forward, but here he has this history with these two women in these particular contexts that are so heavy, politically and in so many other ways. And what it boils down to is him. and the people, the little stories, the living together, the how cold it was, or how the house, the space was L-shaped. I mean,
Right.
those details are the things that knock me over much more than the ginormous gesture that we learn about at the very, very beginning. It's almost like I leave that behind and I
Right.
just want to read the descriptions of Juliette, or
Well, I just want to read the beginning. I married Magdalena here in Paris more than 40 years ago. It was at the time when anti-Jewish thoughts and feelings had suddenly hardened into laws, and she had to be protected. Now that, if you had given me this in a blind test, I'm not sure I would have recognized this as a Mavis Gallant opening. Of course, the next line I would, though, possibly. She was a devout, lighthearted, probably wayward Catholic convert of the sort Dominicans like to have tea with. But she was also Jewish and foreign, to be precise, born in Budapest in 1904. So he marries her. We don't ever find out how he meets her, but she's an ex-actress who has been with a lot of men and has been deserted by a politician who becomes extremely right wing, and she describes Magdalena's reading the paper just to read about this guy and how odious he's become, but she doesn't with it. She doesn't seem angry. She's never angry. She's sort of serene, and what ends up happening in this story is it's the story of the two of them. They're married for a little bit of time. They are involved. They are together, but it is extremely, it's fraught, and also there's no plan for them to actually be married. It was a gesture, but it wasn't entirely a gesture. Like they're a couple. He's a lot younger than she is, a lot younger. I think by like 14 years, I believe, something along those lines. And anyway, somehow they meet, and he marries her in order to give her his name, but also they are together. Anyway, the story moves into the fact that he is now he's trying to get to London to join de Gaulle and the opposition, because we're in occupied France. So they are on a train together, and she is going to Cannes to be with to live with friends and wait out the war, apparently, or the occupation or whatever. And he is going to try and make it to London. And so they're on the train together. And then there's a scene that is a familiar scene in any movie of this time, or even of this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're on a train, the train stops, you got to show your passports, who are you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is this, I'm cutting to the chase of this particular story of the four, but it is an incredible moment where they are now waiting for to be questioned by the border guards. Anyway, here we are. We're on the train. That's what I was trying to get us to. So the story has movement. The movement of the story is that they are on this train, and they have gone heading south, and she's trying to get a safe place to stay, and he's going to join de Gaulle in London. Yes. And be a big hero, right?
Yes.
And the train stops, and he realizes that she's not quite ready for the encounter that she's about to have with these border guards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it had been told. It's so complicated to talk about a Gallant story. This is a 7-page story, and I can barely get a foothold in how to talk about it. But at one point in Paris, before they leave, she has picked up a yellow star that you're supposed to sew on your coat, or baste on your coat is the word that Gallant uses, baste, which I thought was so homely a word. Magdalena, who's Jewish, picks up this star out of curiosity as a souvenir. because she's protected. She's now married to a Parisian. She doesn't have a Jewish name anymore, or whatever. So she picks up this star just out of curiosity, and takes it home. And when they're on the train, he for some reason is so nervous that these guards are about to question them that he opens her case to kind of rummage around and make sure that there's nothing incriminating. And he finds the yellow star because she has brought it with her. And he is utterly flabbergasted. And anyway,
and he takes it.
Yeah, he takes it and he puts it up his sleeve to protect her, because she has no notion of how to protect herself. And also, she's never going to be a victim, and she's never going to consider herself a victim. And she just thinks it's like, why would anyone bother me? And they don't tend to bother her.
Yeah.
I'm all in knots.
No, but you're right. There's so much here. But as you're talking, every time you say something, I see something in the story that corroborates it. Like, for instance, in the compartment, I tried to finish the thoughts begun in the corridor. I had married her to do the right thing. That was established. Other men have behaved well in the past and will continue to do so. It comforted me to know I was not the only one with a safe conscience. It's like he's putting himself in, like what he did was such a singular personal thing, but he can create distance. I feel like this is a guy who creates distance for a particular reason. When near the end of the story, he says, we had agreed not to stare at each other once we'd said goodbye. Magdalena kissed me and turned and pulled herself up the high steps of the train. I got a soft, bent book out of my canvas holdall and began to read something that spoke only to me. So the young think, and I was still that young. Poetry is meant for one reader only. That line, poetry is meant for one reader only. There's an echo of this later, and when we get to if we ever get to the other stories. But that line is I think it's so key about Edouard, because in this story, we're learning this is really Magdalena's story, but we still learn so much about him, and they are things that are reinforced in the other stories. I read something about this series, and he's described in very unflattering terms by a couple of people writing about the stories that I read. And I don't know, I think that's too easy to make him so one-dimensional. I think there's more to him. I think there's more to the person, that it's not just that, he's just one-dimensional and he doesn't care about anything and he's just aloof. No, I don't think anybody in Gallant is just aloof.
It's such an obvious misread.
Yeah.
But she did set herself up for it, because, he for such a hero, he's kind of an asshole, but he's also honest. And he's also like, there's nothing about these people that I had a friend of mine tell me the other day, kind of echoing that is it Say Anything or Sure Thing, where Lloyd Dobler does that rant about he doesn't want to sell anything, buy anything, da-da-da. You know what I mean?
Oh, High Fidelity. I forget the name of the movie. Yeah.
I think it's in Say Anything. But anyway, the point is, like, he was saying, like, I just don't want to, I'm just so tired. Everything I do is about selling. Everything anyone does is about selling. And there's something about Gallant that, even among other writers of her caliber, she's never selling. She is not selling us these characters. These characters are not, and that's why she opens herself up to a misread of, and I always think, like, if people are going to judge characters, then it means they're real, and so that's good. But, like, to think that this guy is, like, somehow a bad character is just such a limit, is such a you're just not reading it. Or to think that she is just a shallow shell, which there's arguments for too, but even she sort of, in her way, is endearing, but she is the cruel one. And we will find that out if we ever get to it. But even that, I couldn't quite blame her. I don't know why. I don't know why I don't blame her, because she is truly cruel. Truly, I think. But anyway, we'll get to that.
Well, so it's anybody who thinks like, oh, there's nothing to it, like he's just he's just aloof and that's it. He's indifferent. No, because the very next thing after poetry is meant for one reader only. Magdalena, gazing tenderly down from the compartment window, must have seen just the shape of the poem on the page. I really had to think about this line. Like, he gets to read the words. She's looking down from a distance, and she can see the shape of the poem. She can see that much, but she can never see the details. And would she appreciate them? No. No, she wouldn't. And so that captures their relationship. When the train started to move, she reached down to me, but I was too far to touch. A small crucifix on a chain slipped free of her blouse. I stuck to our promise and never once raised my eyes. At the same time, I saw everything. The shade of her white hat brim aslant on her face, her hand with the wedding ring. And then the paragraph that comes next is so important. And even if you never read about Juliette, and even if you never read the next three, this idea of when my adventures were over, I would show it to my children, meaning the star. I did not for a second see Magdalena as their mother. They were real children, not souls to be bargained. So it seems to me now. It shows how far into the future I thought you could safely carry a piece of the past. Long after the war, I found the star, still in the same book, and I offered to give it back to Magdalena. But she said she knew what it was like. Oh my God. There's so much. But
You're right. You're right. You don't need the four stories at all. And you're also right to say that you don't need none of the stories needs each other, but reading them together is, I don't know how to describe the experience, but like, of just this weight, the weight, and I don't know if if it was a novel, it would be a 35-page novel, which would be more than most, as all of her stories are more than most people's novels. But the accumulation of what does ends up happening, so in a way, she ends the story perfectly, while at the same time allowing for an opening up. That's such a rare thing. It's such a rare thing. And that the scene that you pointed out when he is pretending, or not really pretending, he has left her on the train. He has now gotten out. They're in Marseille. He is going to try and make his way to London to join the resistance. But they have this last final moment, where, and a lot of people would think in this moment that they were never going to see each other again, that they're both going to their individual fates at this point. And he pulls out a book, and he's reading it. And like you said, she doesn't need to know what he's reading. She just looks at the shape of it, and who knows what she thinks. But there's something beautiful about the way that she looks down at him and watches him while he, following what they had agreed to, does not look at her because he doesn't want to call any attention to her. Because again, they're in such a fraught situation. She's a Jew. They're rounding up Jews. Mm-hmm. That's the subtext of this story. And you could criticize Gallant for not addressing that enough, or even really at all, other than to say that Magdalena is safe and the other people that we never hear about aren't. Gallant knows it. Magdalena knows it, sort of. And Edouard, certainly knows it, which is why he's so desperate to protect her. And then they part. And you take a breath, and if you listen to Gallant, you'd shut the book. But if you happen to notice, if you were reading the original or in the collection, the next story, and in the original, as far as I can understand it, is a extraordinary zooming forward in time to many, many decades later. My second wife, Juliette, died in the apartment on Rue de Lille apologize to French Francophiles all over the world, where she had lived at first alone, more or less, then with me, since the end of the war. All the rooms gave on to the ivy-hung well of a court and were for that reason dark. We often talked about looking for a brighter flat on a top floor with southern exposure and a wide terrace, but Parisians seldom move until they're driven to. In this line, this is them talking to each other. We know the worst of what we got, we told each other. It's better than a bad surprise. and then this story is really about Juliette and Edouard's relationship for 37 years. Not about Magdalena at all, although she haunts the story, and we do become aware, at least at some point, that Magdalena is not only still around, but that she has refused to grant Edouard a divorce. And Juliette comes from a family and a culture where she's not just going to start having babies with Edouard. They got to be married. And they never have that opportunity because under the laws of the time, they had to agree to get divorced, and Magdalena would never agree. And the story opens with Juliette's death after all that has happened. And so you are left with a feeling about Magdalena of, like I said, of sort of cruelty. And the lines are, they have this conversation where it emerges that Edouard has been, over the years, seeing Magdalena apparently more often than Juliette has known. After all the trouble she's made, said Juliette, she meant that for many years my wife would not let me divorce. She couldn't help that, I said. How do you know? I don't know. It's what I think. I hardly knew her. You must have known something. I haven't seen her more than 3 or 4 times in the last 30-odd years, since I started living with you. What do you mean, said Juliette. You saw her just once, with me. We had lunch. You backed off asking her for the divorce. You can't ask for a divorce at lunch. It had to be done by mail. And since then she hasn't stopped writing, said Juliette. Do you mean 3 or 4 times, or do you mean once? I said, once, probably. Probably just that once, which is just like, this is preposterous. Like, you'd know if you'd seen your quote-unquote wife more than once in 30 years. And then there's this paragraph, which is just, I don't know what to say. It's comparable to the paragraph of him reading that poem. Viewing me at close range, as if I were a novel she had to translate. She's the translator. Juliette replied that one ought to be spared unexpected visions. Just now, it was as if 3 walls of the court outside had been bombed flat. Through a bright new gap she saw straight through to my first marriage. We, my first wife and I, postured in the distance like characters in fiction. It's a blows a hole in the whole story, and you'd think that Juliette would, start throwing shit because he's apparently been lying to her about seeing Magdalena, but there's not a relationship going on. I think he just sees her occasionally, and I think maybe Juliette realizes that. Anyway, they watch TV after that. I don't know what to say. Like there's never a reaction that's expected. Her characters act like human beings, not like characters in fiction. I guess that's the point.
Yeah, and I just want to mention that in the collected, this is the 3rd story of the 4th.
Which I think I can't believe she did that, but that is just way geeking out to get into that.
Then what comes next is so interesting to me, too. I watched the tag end of the late news. It must have been during the spring of 1976. Because of the energy crisis, daylight saving had been established. Like any novelty, it was deeply upsetting. People said they could no longer digest their food or be nice to their children, and that they needed sedation to help them through the altered day. A doctor was interviewed. He advised a light diet and early bed until mind and body adjusted to the change. I turned, smiling, to where Juliette should have been. My program came on then, and I watched myself, making a few points before I got up and went to find her. And I'm going to see if you'll read the last part of this, but what I'm getting at is we see the passage of time, how much time has passed, and of course we know that now Juliette is 60 and that they've had this whole life together, and they're still talking about the same things. They're still agonizing about the same things. And there's this, so much time has passed. He's watching himself on a television. It's like everything is different. And this idea of, like any novelty, it was deeply upsetting. Yes. And that, what I see in this story is that this is something people endure and endure and endure and endure their whole lives. And, it goes back to this thing of what Gallant does with history and how the individual character, the story of the individual character carrying that history in a very specific way is something. I don't know how she does it, but I'm just fascinated by this idea. The poetry is for one person. But anyway, the other thing is you walk into the story knowing that Juliette has died.
Right.
And it almost makes it unbearable to read the story.
Yeah.
Even if you open a book, you don't know these characters from whatever. Right. And you walk into the story knowing this fact. And there's something about her, about Juliette, even if you have not read The Colonel's Child.
I wish, because I can see the rationale for the switch.
Mm-hmm.
Of having it, and again, this gets to be, who cares? But if I'd read The Colonel's Child, I almost would have felt like I had a softer landing. There's a cruelty, I think, in having the Rue de Lille be the second story. To the reader, it's just like, it just shows that Gallant she's not cold. She's just, deadly honest, Like, this is how it goes. 37 years passes and your second wife is now dead. Bam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the first, and you do get to the point where you're thinking, oh, the first wife is still alive. This first wife that was just hanging over this, this couple. We were together for a duration of time I daren't measure against the expanse of Juliette's life. It would give me the feeling that I had decamped to a height of land, a survivor's eminence, so as to survey the point at which our lives crossed and mingled and began to move in the same direction. Because she was so young when they met. He's her world, pretty much. And it's a world that is so, it's just incomplete. Like, they just made this life together. And she's a translator, which I also find very interesting.
And then in the third story, or in your case, the second story, we get Juliette as a figure in her own right. And, I see her as completely, there are three extraordinary characters in this series.
Yes, but before we go there, can I just say one last thing? And this, I really wanted you to read the last part of the last paragraph, because I feel like it connects to this idea about how many decades have passed, how the world has changed, how different the world is from the time when she was 17. She's 60 now. And that very last paragraph says so much about it. It says something about her. Would you mind reading it?
Sure. And I think it was this paragraph that made me think maybe it was a random choice to go back to one of our stalwarts, Gallant, because she's always so good. But I felt like she was speaking directly to the moment in this paragraph. I turned, smiling, to where Juliette should have been. Now she's not dead. She's just gone in the kitchen because he's just admitted to her that he may have had more contact with Magdalena over the years than has been known. But my program came on, and he's a television interviewer, kind of a highbrow French literary critic on television. And apparently, they've been waiting to watch his own program or something like that. She was in the kitchen, standing in the dark, clutching the edge of the sink. That's right there. She did not move when I turned the light on. I put my arms around her, and we came back to her sitting room and watched the rest of the program together. She was knitting squares of wool to be sewn together to make a blanket. There was always, somewhere, a flood or an earthquake or a flow of refugees, and those who outlasted jeopardy had to be covered. You should probably leave the silence in because that's the only way to respond to that paragraph, I think. But I can't help just violating that silence just to point out those who outlasted jeopardy had to be covered. Yeah. And that's what I think it says a great deal about Juliette. But then we get the story of his arrival in London to save the day. He makes fun of himself. He says that I thought I was going to be the linchpin in taking back France. Like one vote in a close election. He was going to be the guy, and he's going to join the Free French and General de Gaulle and be the hero. And like everything else in this story, there's that. These are. I think of but Patrick Modiano's stories where his characters are never ever heroes. Here too, Edouard is not going to be a hero, but he does try. He has arrived in London to fulfill his destiny as being he's going to drop on a parachute and save France. Instead, during his training, he gets in a motorcycle accident and ends up in the hospital and never, as far as I know, fights with the partisans at all, fights with de Gaulle at all. So there you go. That's how it goes. And he meets Juliette, who's one of these people who goes to sits by the bed of injured soldiers.
Yeah.
And again, another familiar story, Hemingway.
Yeah.
Nursing the hurt soldier, the injured soldier back to health, right? Mm-hmm. That's Juliette. But of course, in Gallant, it's just so much more the possibilities of like an obvious thing. It's almost like it never occurs to her because it doesn't happen in real life.
Yes, and as you're talking, well, two things. When you are young, your patriotism is like metaphysical frenzy. Later, it becomes one more aspect of personal crankiness. Then some definitions seemed incomplete. For instance, I was not entirely single. Before leaving Paris, I had married. So here it is. You don't have to have read the previous story. There's all this context and these, interesting details about him. The marriage was an incident gradually being rubbed out in the long perspective I've described. So I saw it, so I would insist. You have to remember the period and France occupied to imagine how one could think and behave. We always say this. Think of the times we had to live in, when the past is dragged forward, all the life gone out of it and left unbreathing at our feet. There's that Gallant, history, this idea that I keep harping on in my inarticulate way. It's in all the stories. It's just something that that's very affecting, I think, for me.
Just want to add to that. Gallant in her nonfiction is not shy of politics at all.
Right.
She was an outraged writer often about politics, and certainly, on the left, she writes incredibly about an abortion case and some amazing things that she does. But in her fiction, it's like she just patently refuses to sort of give us something obvious, Yeah. And that's why Edouard is, an interesting character. And again, you could argue that his behavior here is despicable, that he doesn't really tell, he never tells Juliette he's married. she's the one, because Juliette has connections through her father and the opposition, that she actually ends up hearing that he's married from another source and confronts him with it. And there's this extraordinary scene with the two of them in his little room, because he's been discharged from the hospital and he's given a room. And he's just kind of, he's injured in this motorcycle accident that happened in London, not fighting the Germans or anything, right? And what he does in the war is fall in love with Juliette. And and they have this scene where they talk about the number of children they're going to have. Now that we were engaged, I began to see what the word covered for Juliette. I had no qualms about smuggling her into my room, though never, of course, late at night. We took the mattress off the sagging daybed and put it on the floor in front of the gas fire. Juliette would take her clothes off and tell me about her early years, though I didn't always listen. I mean, again, he's an asshole sometimes, for sure. Sometimes she talked about the life waiting for us in Paris and the number of children we would have and the names we would give them. I remember a Thomas and a Claire. And if you take that paragraph, and like you said, you could read The Colonel's Child and absolutely never read another Gallant story for the rest of your life, you'd be fine. But if you read the final story in this grouping, Lena, you'd see that Thomas comes back at the very end.
Yeah.
The Thomas that never existed.
Yeah.
Thomas never existed because Magdalena would never offer the divorce, and Juliette wasn't going to have kids out of wedlock.
Yeah. I was thinking about how, and so to talk about this, you do have to take the stories, the four stories, but I was thinking about how...
I hope we're not ruining these stories. Do you think we're ruining them?
No, people should find them and read them, because I think, there's so much more to read, and you should see my copy. It's just glorious just to read it and receive it yourself. But just the way that Edward marries Magdalena to sort of help her and save her and ensure her safe passage for the rest of her life. But then here's Juliette with this kind of, I don't know, I don't want to call her savior, but here she is, keeping him company and taking care of him. And this is a guy who, had lost 6 front teeth and, he's a mess physically. There's this line of, I left the hospital on crutches. There was no such thing as therapy. You got going or you did not. And she is a child. She is childlike. He describes her as, she was dressed in the least becoming clothes I had ever seen on a young woman. A worn and drooping tunic, thick black stockings, and a navy sweater frayed at the cuffs. She had spent 5 months in an English girls' school, she told me, and this was the remains of a uniform. She had nothing else to wear, nothing that fitted. Her mother was too busy to shop. And there are other implications about this kind of distance she has from the mother in the father's absence, and kind of explains like this loneliness that he perceives in her. He says the word lonely a couple of times, refers to her loneliness. I think I wanted to get her out of her loneliness. When for all her shyness she asked if I loved her, I said I would never leave her. And I'm sure we both thought it meant the same thing. So, and instead of a ring, because they can't get married, he gives her some of this Algerian soil that he had been saving. It's so odd and interesting and so personal.
Probably some readers would know more what that means, and it seems to me a little, like a little colonial for him to be.
Oh, yes.
What is he? But there's something about patriotism that is represented by that soil. At least that's the implication. Anyway, it's not a great wedding gift.
No, and her father is absent. The mother seems quite absent in other ways, and she's this lonely kid, young woman. How many children should we have? I'd say about 10. Well, 7, at least 5. Her clothes were scattered all over the floor, and the room was cold in spite of the fire, but she didn't seem to feel it. I hate children, I said. I was amazed that I could say something so definite and so cruel, and it sounded so true. When had I stopped liking them? Perhaps when I adopted the colonel's child, meaning Juliette, believing she would never grow up. I could have said, I don't like other children, but nothing about this conversation was thought out. You will love them, she said happily. You'll see. She held her spread fingers against the gas flame, counting off their names. Each finger stood for a greedy, willful personality as tough as a fist. An only child, she invented playmates and named them, and I was supposed to bring them to life. So he's just not about it. And I feel like there's this thing in the story that even if Magdalena had granted him the divorce, I don't know. There's something here about this idea of how easy it is to put it off on her, when in fact, Edward could have been more honest with Juliette. I mean, he does say he hates them, and she's like, no, you'll love them. And what we get to hear from him is an honesty that it surprises even him, that he can say it out loud, or say it to himself at least, or think it. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that way, but it's dishonest, right? And maybe this is why people are so tough on him, when critics are so tough on this character when they write about him, is like there is a dishonesty about him in some of the retelling. As honest as he's being about it, he has been dishonest to Juliette.
And I think I'd go further and say that, of course, he could have gotten that divorce. He could have demanded it. There's ways in which he could have done it. Magdalena even mentions this later in the fourth story, but I don't think we need to even get into it. So yeah. Edouard is not a great guy. I don't read fiction in order to feel like I need to have somebody doing the right things all the time.
Exactly, because
I don't know what the stress is on that all the time.
Yes, and so as you're saying this, my eye falls on something else. I had never. This is why people should read the story. You can go to any paragraph and fall into the story. I had never thought about gratitude. It seemed to me that yes, she was probably grateful. I suddenly felt impatient for the war to end so that I could approach her hand in hand with Juliette and ask for a divorce and a blessing. But this is in a very sort of passionate moment. I don't even know if passion is the right word for Edward, but this is in a moment where they're intimate, they're together. And so, sometimes when I think about Edward, I and the divorce and the children and Juliette's menopause and how she can never have children and how that's the end of the story for her with that wish. I wonder sometimes what is it about Edward? Did he want to stay married to Magdalena? What is going on? Like, I don't know the answer. No matter how many times I read the stories, I really don't know the answer to that question, except that he didn't want children. He loves Juliette enough to make this life with her for so many years into 1976. But then I think, maybe he didn't want to be married to her and be a father. He wanted to stay attached to Magdalena. And I don't even know why that comes through for me.
I think because it's there. And I think that, I think you kind of figure, yeah. But I think that's it. And I think it's cruel. I think both he and Magdalena are cruel. And yet, I do read a lot of love between Edouard and Juliette, or at least some degree.
Yes.
And it's a life. And I think there's, as much as this story is about anything, it's about fiction itself. One of the things that Edouard, we haven't really talked about, but he's a failed fiction writer. He has been trying to write a novel while he's in London, convalescing, and it's not working. And he admits to Juliette that he's torn it up. Juliette, kneeling, fastened the buttons of the latest flour sack her mother had chosen. "Why did you tear up your novel?" she said. And this line, because I can't wrench life around to make it fit some fantasy. Because I don't know how to make life sound worse or better, or how to make it sound true. Instead of saying this, I said, "How do you expect me to support 10 children?" There's blind spots, and people have blind spots. And I feel like the fact that this story is told in the first person we're never going to know for sure, but I think you spelled it out. And in some ways, I think it's what makes these stories tough. They're not enjoyable in the sense of upliftingness. They just are. And, walk around Paris and look up and see all those apartments. This is what goes on inside some of them, or one of them. And I feel like that's true of any city. And I feel like Gallant got that. Not every story is going to be how we want it to be. And yeah, Edouard, again, I think he's open to judgment, as he should be. But I also feel like this is it. This is one life, 2 lives, 3 lives. These are 3 lives. And Juliette, does she get the short end of the stick in this? Yes, she does.
I really like at the end where he evokes the parachute jump, where he says her hands began to move again, the other way, unbuttoning. She was the colonel's child. She had already held her breath and jumped.
Yeah.
And that was the start and the end of it.
She's the courageous one. She's the one who takes the leap. The 2 of them, I think that they somewhat enjoy their connection, apparently. And that's it. And Magdalena and Edouard are going to stay married, even though for 37 years they see each other a handful of times. But like you say, that unbuttoning is so, I don't know, and Juliette makes her own decision. She makes her own call.
Yes.
She must know who she's dealing with, even though she is a kid. She's 18. I don't know. I don't know.
He says, we may be in big trouble over this. And she says, oh, what a pity. We'll always be together. We will always be happy. How lovely. What a shame. I think she still trusted me at that moment. I hope so. That word still there, even if you don't read the next story or the one before or whatever, I think she still trusted me. It carries so much. I think she still trusted me at that moment. I hope so.
Gallant has enough respect for her characters to not make them. I just feel like she's not going to bend the fiction to please anybody. And I think that that's always the case with her.
This has been The Lonely Voice with Peter Orner. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.